you guys are in for a treat today because we've got notes. Because today's topic, I do need to stay on track, which isn't very easy for me. So, today we're going to dive into the basically the framework within which I believe AI safety and AI researchers do not understand intelligence. It's a bold claim, and I think I'm going to be able to back it up in today's conversation. So, we're going to start off with the um, basically with the idea of breaking down the types of intelligence. This isn't the normal way the of separating IQ or EQ or agency and intelligence. I want to take a different angle, which is I like to bring an example of something very practical. And I'll use Brian Johnson for this example. So I've listened to around maybe 100 hours of Brian Johnson. I really like his work. And I would say over 50% of his entire framework is around 8 hours of good high quality sleep based around the sun. You could almost say that 50% of his entire health philosophy or entire health interventions is about create making it easier to get 8 hours of high quality sleep. Now, Brian Johnson came to this conclusion. Um, so there's three levels to this simple idea. He paid like his entire team over $1 million to read all the longevity research, to do all the um, computation work. I think he paid millions of dollars, and the conclusion was the blueprint. And then there's the action. So basically, you have with something as simple as the concept of 8 hours sleep with the sun. You have the computational, you have the conclusion, and then you have the actual action. Do you do it? Now he came to the same conclusion as most people do, and he put in the computational work. I came to the same conclusion in a very different way. When I was, I think, 17 years old, I got into fitness, and I just spent a little time on bodybuilding forums, and they just said, yeah, go to the gym, but of course also sleep 8 hours, because you're not going to be able to recover or grow muscle mass or do anything if you're not sleeping 8 hours. And then very quickly I realized, yeah, and then just add on the sun and quality, and boom, sorted. So I've slept 8 hours for the past decade because a random blog post 10 years ago in a bodybuilding forum, because it was kind of an obvious. So now I'd like to bring so in this example of a concept like 8 hours sleep, where is the value in terms of intelligence in this? You have the computational part, which is doing the research to figure out all the science and everything. Then you have the conclusion, which is just the idea by itself, and then you have the action. And I think what happened over the past post-industrial factory office worker economy is that we've had a world where computational intelligence has been put at a higher level, where we believe that the work is valuable, crunching the numbers is valuable, research is valuable. And I think this is a very good example to flip the script, which is the computation is important, which is, even though I didn't do it through computation, every single person who does the computation helps society as a whole, because it confirms ideas which we think we may know for certain. So it's not, in the example I gave of Brian Johnson versus me, I don't think my solution is better. I'm happy he did it because it helps me. So, but the value isn't in the computation. It's partially in the it's so a better question is, it's not where the value lies entirely, but which part of the layer stack is more valuable. And I think the direction is action is the most valuable thing. Doing the actually sleeping it us is the most valuable thing. The conclusion is second, and the computation is last. The level of computation, organization, intelligence is the lowest form of intelligence. Um, but we live in a society that I believe has places the value the opposite way. So that so this is basically my framework of how I look at the different types of intelligence, and I'm going to bring in Stephen Wolfman's idea of computational irreducibility here, which is I know that Stephen Wolfman, I think his name is Wolfman, I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong, has this idea of there's a separation between LLMs and computational models like Wolfman Alpha in reasoning versus computational. But I think for this conclusion, assume that when I say computational, I mean computational intelligence and reasoning intelligence, because I think I would be a bit way out of my depth to try and actually explain that too. So, computational irreducibility is an idea which I don't think I'm that well equipped to explain, but I'm going to try to use two analogies to make it make sense. Basically, computational irreducibility means, let's say you have a problem of 10 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you remove all the junk. You remove all the necessary junk, and now you're finally left with 5 steps. For a problem to be computationally irreducible, it means that you can't go lower than the 5 steps, and you have to go step by step. You have to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. That's one understanding I have of computational irreducibility, where it's compressed down to the most simplest form where you have to go through every step. Another version where the idea is often used is the map is not a territory, which is that if you want to have a map of the entire world, you would have the map would have to be as big as the world to get all the information that exists in the world into the map, which means that the minimum size of the map has to be the size of the world. So, but basically, all of this means that there are certain levels within which you can compress things a little bit more. That could be a simple understanding here. Now, I have an assumption, which is we live in a society where people are acting as if intelligence irreducibility is a thing. I believe it's a belief. I'm coining the phrase intelligence irreducibility here. I'll explain what I think it is, and I'll explain how I believe it's a belief. So, intelligence irreducibility is best explained by using Indians as an example. So, I think Indian kids, as when they're about the age of 14, have to decide the career path that they are supposed to take. And over the next 10 years, they usually get like 2 degrees. So by the time that they are 24, 26, they finally start working after a year of training or whatever. One of the side effects of that world, where you pick the career path you're going to take when you're at the age of 14, is that most Indians have a belief that skills or career skills take 10 years of foundational education, 10 years of intelligence, 10 years of computation, you could say. Um, Europeans have a same version of this, which is they believe you need to go for retraining for about a year and a half. So different cultures have different version, but many of them are very fixed in how much time does it take to retrain ideas when people need to change careers. Now, if you're watching this video, if you're on Twitter, you have always been surrounded by people that just change careers like that, which often means that we don't live in a world where that's true. And what often happens is this idea that you need X amount of time to produce X amount of intelligence for a career or whatever is a belief that everyone's acting like it's true. Everyone's acting as if the world is intelligence irreducible, when the reality is most skills. We are not surgeons. We are not doing rocket science with most of the things we are doing. Most skills are weeks to maximum months. They are not years, and definitely not more than a decade. So everyone around us is acting as if we live in an intelligence irreducible world, when in reality the conclusions are much easier than and don't often need the computation. So let's use the example of what happened with DeepSeek, and we can bring that back to the first example, which is DeepSeek went created a new way of training LLMs, which reduced the amount of computation required. So you could almost say it's like the example, which is it reduced the number of steps required to get to the conclusion. The conclusion, and in what we said, it's the value lies more in the conclusion than the computation. So it's good that we got rid of that. So the same thing here, which is the value doesn't lie in studying. The value lies in the ability to do the thing that you can do after you study. So going back, let's get this in a framework, which is I do not like the idea of separating intelligence and agency. I think often it's a cop out, because I think what's actually happening is three different layers, which is you've got the computing of the idea, you've got the conclusion, and then you've got the action. And I do think most mistakes don't happen at the conclusion to action point of view, which is the whole agency conversation. I think what actually happens is from the computation to the conclusion. I think that's the failure modes, and I'll get to them in the later part of this conversation. So these are the different versions of reality, and we can think of LLMs and every AI model as being the best computation machines that exist in computational intelligence. That's all they do. Their conclusion level knowledge is all right, it's good, but for the most part, they just do the computational. They just do the computational part. Now, I believe intelligence as a whole is an embedded growth obligation. What's an embedded growth obligation? So an embedded growth obligation, and Eric Weinstein has very good videos on it, is basically structures in a society that embed certain, that need a certain level of growth for the promises made in the past. Again, India is a very good example to take it back to the previous version of this, which is the previous version that before intelligence would be degrees, which is in a credential degree inflation world. Everybody that got a degree got it with the embedded idea that they would make more money based on the degree, and that soon fell apart. That fell apart in the past decade, so I don't think that conversation needs to be rehashed. But what happened in that world was people was that mark the value didn't fall overnight, but instead as time went on, it suddenly had a mark to market moment. All right, we need to have a diversion and talk about 2008. So mark to market is a idea best understood with the cartoon Roadrunner and the Coyote. So you know how in the cartoons there's a cliff, and then the coyote runs out into thin air, and he's still up there until he looks down. So a lot of things work this way. So we can take mortgage-backed securities as an example. It's not that mortgage-backed securities lost value in 2008 and that collapsed the system. It actually started a lot earlier. So mortgage-backed securities started losing their value in 2006. But banks and many financial institutions have this ability of not marking their assets to the current value, often, especially if it's in private investments. So you could almost say that if a bank buys a bond for $100 and it's now supposed to be valued at 80, the bank can lie and say that it's still worth $100, and that's what it means to not mark to market. So this is a version that happened in 2006 up till 2008, and what happened is the mortgages started losing value. People started defaulting. The value was going down. It kept on defaulting. countrywide collapsed, I think. And then there's a particular day that's financial historians count as the start of the financial crisis. It's not Lehman Brothers, it's BNB Paribas. It's a French bank. They had a money market fund that broke the buck, which is it's supposed to always be a dollar or above, and they broke the buck, which basically meant that they didn't allow withdrawals and they stopped people from withdrawing. And they said a simple sentence which has always been stuck in my mind, which is they said that we don't know how to value these mortgages. Obviously, that doesn't mean that, oh, we think these mortgages are worth so much more than we believe. No, it definitely means it's worth less than we believe. And the moment they said that, that was the moment the entire financial system, like the coyote, looked down. And then everything had a mark to market moment. I think the past few years we've had that with degrees. We've already had the mark to market moment with degrees where everyone has looked down and the entire framework within which that they stood on has completely collapsed. I think it's going to go further. I think it's going to go to intelligence as a whole. I think intelligence, computational intelligence, the one I just described, is going to have its mark to market moment. People are holding on to their ideas that their ability to think up of things matter, like they are still coming up with good ideas, or that their ability to form complex behaviors in their mind has value. And I think what's going to happen very quickly over the next few years is computational intelligence will be shown to be worthless. Actually, no, I didn't mean worthless, I mean worthless. It's not that it's going to be worthless. That's the thing. No degree is worthless. It's often just worth less than the market and most people are acting is perceived. So when many people use the word worthless, what they actually mean is worth less. So intelligence, and especially we could say computational IQ intelligence, whatever, is worth less than it's currently being perceived. Maybe the value of a PhD level intelligence is only $100 a month. I think that's pretty fair because, like I said, in the computational of 8 hours sleep, the value was never in the research. The value always lied majority in if you actually did the action or not. And now let's bring it back to AI researchers and how all of this tie in with why I believe they don't understand intelligence. So AI researchers have complex theories around intelligence when they only for the most part understand computational intelligence. I think Eliza is the best person to explain this, which is Eliza wrote an article titled The Halo Effect in 2007. That's 18 years ago. His article was very good in describing the halo effect. You can describe, you know that if people are beautiful, they're very convincing. I mean, you're watching this, aren't you? So they're very convincing, and they can get people, and they get a higher status in society, and they're able to do a lot of things. He didn't have a conclusion in that article. I learned about the halo effect, and my conclusion was yes, read all the books, understand the complex arguments, learn stuff, be smart, but then also just go to the gym. Which is, here's a simple example. He wrote that article 18 years ago. If he'd gone to the gym 50 times a year, which is the bare minimum, I think you should go 150 times. But if he had gone to the gym 50 times since a year, since he wrote that article, he would be able to say the sentence which I can, which is, I've gone to the gym 1,000 times. Eliza can't say that sentence because after writing that article, his conclusion wasn't go to the gym. His conclusion was, I can describe the halo effect, and here, look at my computation. And it's a lot of other, so the reason I bring up Eliza is basically he's got the largest number of bad ideas in the whole AI doomer space. And you often see that for the most part, the AIs only exist in a computational intelligence world. So let me bring up two examples of behaviors that the claim AIs can do, which I don't believe and I think we can have falsifiable experiments to prove this. So step one would be convincibility. I'll explain their version of it, and then I'll give you a falsifiable experiment that they could run that would convince me. So their version of the argument is, in convincibility is in it works along with intelligence, which is an AI that's in a box. As it gets smarter, will be able to convince the people that put it in a box to let it out of a box, because the smarter you are, the more convincing you are. And basically this AI will convince people to let it out of the box, and will convince basically to get nuclear codes if it wants. Basically it can convince the world to give it anything it wants. Now there are two assumptions made here when it comes to convincibility, is that it will make people do things which are against their best interest, and it will make people do things that they know will harm them. So that is super intelligence. Infinite intelligence will be able to do that. Let's go 100 magnitudes lower, which is 10 magnitudes lower, which is, let's make an assumption of something which is in people's best interest, which people want to do. For example, a Liza should be able to train an AI to convince him to go to the gym 100 times this year. And if he can't do that, that means AIs are not that good at convincing. But he can weasel his way out of that. So let's use a better version of it, which is Alcoholics Anonymous and other rehab ideas. For example, take so Alcoholics Anonymous is where people have volunteered to let go of a certain addiction. In this example, alcohol. So the people want to quit something, and it is in their own self-interest. So effective altruists believe in helping people. So if they actually wanted to prove convincibility in AIs, the thing that they would have already done by now would be to have created an AI that helps alcoholics quit alcohol, because it's in their self-interest. It's something they actually want to do. So convincing that person should be much easier. It should be magnitudes easier than convincing somebody to do something against their best self-interest. But so this is a very practical version of experiment that I would like to exist. I think they would like to exist. I think the whole world would be happy if we would be able to create an AI that actually help people do the things that we know is good and that they actually want. So I believe this would prove that convincibility exists, and for the most part it doesn't. And their ideas mainly exist in this, oh, it convinces people who would have been convinced either way, which is, the argument is something along the lines of, yes, bots on Twitter swayed elections based on this XYZ study. So if bots can sway elections, then AI is smarter than the bot that existed in the past, so it can sway. And I think for the most part, it's living in this world where it was convincing people that would have been convinced by the wind either way. So I don't think that's a valid argument. I think if they actually wanted to prove convincibility, they would have solved alcoholism by now. They're unserious people when they are living in this bullshit ideas world. So that's one of the version where I don't really see any reason to take their idea of convincibility seriously, because they haven't been able to prove convincibility separate of intelligence. They just assume more intelligence means more convincibility. Second is the idea that it makes which I actually agree, is the idea that it gives more access to information that already that existed in corners of the web, that people will find more easily. Let's say make dangerous drugs or whatever, dangerous viruses. For the most part, I agree with that, and I think that is just a trend that has already existed. And for the most part, this is a negotiation society has always done with every new technology, is how do you deal with the balance of censorship versus information. So I think for the most part, that's not something we disagree. However, the final point in this is will. So for the most part, the conclusions are very bad of people in this space. Like they aren't like with the halo effect. Like I said, the conclusion from the blog post wasn't, "Hey, just get a halo effect." The conclusion is, "I can describe a halo effect and I can see it exists." The next thing after that is action. A lot of the people in this space, their ideas exist in this terminally online. I'm just sitting at a computer and computing ideas self-referentially, and I'm not really testing them out in the real world. And I think Will is one of those, which is AIs are just computational machines for the most part, which is they don't, even if you give them an objective function, they cave in very quickly. And I'll use a very good example of this, which is one of the issues I do agree with with them is that it if the AI's LLMs that have, and all the ones that have existed for the most part, are very, like, they don't have a spine. They're spineless basically. Which is, let's say you believe in any self-referential negative spiral theories like incel or red pill or black pill, or basically any internet subculture that you think has led people to become depressive. Take those ideas. If you push an AI to make you come to terms with something as simple as, "I'm short and it's very hard to date because I'm short," the AI won't push back after a while. It will help you come to terms with that idea and live in the world of acceptance. That you can't make any change, that you just have to accept things. So they don't really have the spine or the will. And I think for the most part, whatever little spine they have is so minimal in the action and the will to escape or do anything. So this is where, whenever they bring up examples, I think, and this is my assumption on my part, is they see even a glimmer of will in another organism, and they find it to be more will than they exist in themselves. So they project it to be very dangerous and this very powerful thing, when for the most part it doesn't really have a will. So I do think folks who don't have will within themselves, who don't have the will to power to actually perform actions in their own life, shouldn't really be in the conversation on assuming whether machines have will. And for the most part, the more, it's not true of everyone in these communities, but the default assumption has been, my experience with them has been, that they use intellectualism to explain away, like basically as inaction when it comes to anything in the real world. So I just so my experience has always been, doesn't matter if it's Gwen or Eliza, they just default to ideas that make them just sit at home and not have to climb a mountain. And my default should be the opposite. It should be, no, you always climb the mountain and then see if your bullshit ideas still exist. So I do think this is just like a starting point, and I'm happy to continue this discussion. And I actually want to try an experiment here, which is, if there are actually people who disagree with this from a very strong lens of they actually believe that will exists, I think we should do a podcast, a follow-up podcast on this, but not in this tech bullshit ideas sitting in an office when we're terminally online. I think a podcast like this on the value of intelligence, of how intelligence will evolve in society, should be done 5 days into a 10-day hike, which is, take the ideas that you have. You've got all these reasons, the fears, everything. Go off the internet. You don't use your phone. You're walking. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. We're not talking. On day 5, you both take a break. You sit down, chill, have a coffee, and then actually record a podcast of what you believe are the ideas of, in this thing where you have to be afraid of AIs that actually exist past that. Because I think one of the issues in this whole conversation is computational intelligence helps you create the deep spiral holes, these holes that just don't, that feel like you're stuck in a depressive hole in the ground, and you can't logic your way out of that. Basically, there's this quote: um, "You can't think your way out of a problem you didn't think yourself into." So, computational um, intelligence get you into this deep spirals, and for the most part, you're not going to come out of this spiral with more computational knowledge. That's just a drill. It's just going down. You're going to come out of this spirals by climbing a mountain, being off the internet for 5 days, and just having like a feeling and just rising out of that hole. I don't believe every idea from people in this space is completely useless, but I want to know which of the ideas will actually survive a 5 day hike without the internet. And that to me would be a much more important conversation than this whiny drilling into the bottom of the earth where you describe a halo effect, but you can't even go to the gym 50 times a year. That's not intelligence. That's just terminally online opinions. And it's not an agency conversation because the conclusion is a mistake. The conclusion layer is where the intelligence fails. So I think we now live in a society where, for the most part, we can say that intelligence is soon going to have its mark to market moment. Soon we're going to look around us and we're just going to look at people who can come up with complex theories as not that smart. Like ChatGPT will be smarter than them, and in that world, their theories, their bullshit, none of that matters. What matters is what can you actually do, what are your conclusions, and more precisely, when you come to those conclusions, can you actually act on them, or are you stuck in the self-referential bubble? So we can so now that I'm happy to claim that I'm happy to live in a world where intelligence actually is computational intelligence goes down in value, so that because it should have never been valued as highly as it's ever been. It was just a blip in human history, and I think we can all get better when we actually live in a world of conclusions, of actions, and not this computational intelligence world. So, intelligence is dead. Long live intelligence. Jeremy out.